Hello guys, Dominic back with another video, another slide presentation. This time I'm going to be talking about Elvis, and basically I think that if the United States of America was a person, it would have to be Elvis. Elvis is essentially an archetype image of this nation, and we're going to get into that. So, Elvis Presley, through great struggle and trauma, became one of the most influential cultural figures to ever exist, embodying the American dream through all its faults and virtues. His life is a reflection of the nation's history and identity at large and can help us as Americans understand our identity once again in these shifting and tumultuous times. His myth is known by all, and he has transcended in a way reminiscent of ancient mythological and modern religious figures, in that he is recognized and generally loved, although some do dislike or even hate him. Regardless, his life can help us make better decisions in our own lives and act as a guide towards healing and self-improvement on an individual level and a collective level, because a lot of Elvis's problems are the same problems that most people have, especially particularly in this country, the United States. And basically he is a reflection from the micro of the macro. So here's a quote on archetypes. The contents of the collective unconscious are archetypes, primordial images that reflect basic patterns that are common to us all, and which have existed universally since the dawn of time. So again, Elvis, being an individual, would be the micro. His life reflects patterns that have existed throughout this nation's history, the macro. And I'm going to get into some of these patterns here and reflections. So Elvis, I would say, is pretty much what you could call an embodiment of the American spirit. Elvis grew up in a poor working class family called a shotgun house during the height of the Depression. So these were long, narrow houses. Well, they weren't really that long, but they only had like 2 rooms. The average income for someone in this area in Talipo, Mississippi, would have been earning about $40 a year from picking cotton, with things like clothes costing $1.50. So that's about 3.5% of your income right there, just on an outfit. Elvis himself, by the time he came of age, was training to become an electrician, whose only chance of escaping a working class life was by making it big in the music industry. He was eventually signed by Sun Records at 19 years old, meeting with managers like Bob Neal and then eventually Colonel Tom Parker, and he made it big. Parker, and this is not my quote, this is people who knew Elvis, this is what they say. Parker provided Elvis the dream, but it cost him his life. So Bob Neal, right here in the picture, this is Bob Neal, helped Elvis first become known, and then one day Tom Parker met with Elvis and pretty much took over from there. And I would say that this mirrors early American history of our humble beginnings, and then going on to achieve unprecedented feats in the form of the entire nation from East Coast to West Coast becoming one nation, and then eventually the world's most powerful nation in a short time period. Uh, Something to note about this country forming from East Coast to West Coast it's never been done before. Um, you can think of empires from the past, like the Roman Empire. They had provinces, so they had Hispania and Gaul and Anatolia and places in between. But these places were not Italy. These places weren't Rome. Whereas here in the United States, you have California, you have Colorado, you have New York and Maine and Montana and all the other states in between. All of that is the United States, which was not the case with past Roman empires. Before, all these places would have to pay tribute to uh, a central city or central authority and basically be at their mercy in terms of what type of laws are going to be imposed on them. And it's kind of the same here, but those people were still Gauls, or those people were still Hispanians or Dacians. Here in the United States, everyone is an American. So that's what I mean by unprecedented feats in the form of this nation. And obviously, Elvis achieved unprecedented feats in the music world once he signed with Colonel Parker. However, like Elvis, the United States, didn't do it alone, as I say. He had Bob Neal and Parker. Well, in the early days, the United States had Spanish and French allies helping them fight against the British. But those allies came at a cost. And right here in the bottom right, here's a depiction of some Spanish soldiers. They're wearing the white uniforms, and I'm pretty sure those are supposed to be Americans in the blue uniforms. But anyway, Colonel Tom Parker, as far as I can tell, was basically a type of agent who got blackmailed into handling Elvis. Now, whether or not he was initially doing that from the start, I don't know. But as time went on, he became to be known as Elvis's handler. And he himself was being handled. Well, if we look at these nations, the French and the Spanish, who were they serving? The Catholic Church. Meanwhile, England, who the United States was trying to secede from during the Revolutionary War, which is when these nations helped, was Protestant. So, basically, I think that the Catholic Church used nations like this to help get America to a spot where they want it to so that they could infiltrate it and take over. And I'm not going to necessarily go that direction with this presentation, but you will see the theme of being used by people who don't ultimately want your betterment or what's good for you. So Elvis, I would call him a modern sun hero. And the sun hero archetype embodies divine origins, rebellion, hope, and resurrection. On the Jungian archetypal scale, they seem to be a mix between the jester, the ruler, and the hero. And the jester there, typically playful, spontaneous, memorable rulers. They strive to attain stability and achieve great things, which Elvis had a strong pressure in his life from the people who knew him, such as his Memphis Mafia, his parents, and Colonel Tom Parker, to perform and achieve things at a high level. So just because he was a ruler archetype, he himself was kind of being ruled. And the hero archetype, Elvis definitely thought of himself as a hero who basically wanted to better the world and heal it. So Elvis, I think, is like many other sun heroes who came before him, like Horus or Mithras or Jesus. These individuals also embody these archetypes. Elvis believed he could heal people with touch. He believed he could astral travel and communicate with the dead. And he believed he was an embodiment of Christ consciousness while he was alive. And one could say even in death, because his image seems to be very well known and powerful and is typically associated with good things, just like Jesus. And ultimately, I think Elvis wanted to be like Jesus as much as he could. Elvis also had a mystical origin, which I will get into. And in the womb, he would frequently, even ritualistically, be exposed to the church choir while he was growing up. So supposedly while he was in the womb, his mother would go there multiple times a week and they would just be singing their choir music. And that had an impact on Elvis in the womb. And in life, Elvis tried to emulate role models such as Jesus and Captain Marvel. He really looked up to Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is the DC hero they make the Shazam movies on. And he's basically, in the flash of lightning, can turn into a superhero from this little kid, basically. And I think that's largely how Elvis thought of himself as well, especially when he went on stage. However, one thing I will say is, since Elvis lived in the modern day, we can see his faults and we realize that he is only human, who I think in his mind thought he was doing the best he could do to live up to the example set by Jesus and other figures, but definitely Jesus. I'm fairly certain Jesus was his favorite. And you could say other things about these other characters too. You know, there's that Bible verse about Jesus when he appears out of the garden with an unclothed boy or something like that. There's also the Horus. Horus is very gripped by revenge. Mithras is associated with war. And I would say Elvis is just associated with materialism, which I'm going to get into here in further slides as we go along. So one of the things that inspired me to make this was looking into Miguel Connor's work. You know, he wrote a book here. I did not read the book, but I did listen to many of his lectures. So he may mention some of these things I mention in this presentation in the book. And he does mention some of the things that I mention in this presentation in some of the lectures and interviews he's given. But I do present things that I'm fairly certain are original and diverge from his overall message just a little bit. So Miguel Connor is an esoteric researcher, and he put together this book here on the left, highlighting some of the miracles that he supposedly did and UFO encounters he had spoken about by those who knew him. Some of these range from healing sick and injured people, weather manipulation, and blue light phenomenon which followed him throughout his life. Connor states that at Elvis's birth there was a strange blue light at their house and everything else seemed to stand still. So he'll say that Vernon was out working in the field and suddenly there was a quiet stillness and all the animals seemed to just stop. And he looked at the house and there was a blue light. However, he forgot about this blue light, and one of Elvis's UFO encounters at Graceland, while Vernon was there, prompted Vernon to remember the blue light and explain to Elvis what had happened to him at his birth. And this weighed very heavily on Elvis's mind, and he seemed to embrace the fact that he was some sort of messenger from beyond, and he genuinely believed he could perform miracles. And when Vernon told him this, Elvis basically just thought that he has been chosen by some sort of higher power, whether it's spiritual beings, whether it's literal aliens, whatever it was he thought, to be this sort of person. Essentially, he's a sort of chosen one. Is kind of what I got when Vernon revealed this to him at that moment. And if he didn't think of it in that moment, I think as time went on in his life, he began to embrace this idea more and more that he is some sort of chosen person to help heal and lead people. So one miracle he said to have done that you can find online, an interview with someone who supposedly knew him, while he was driving with Elvis, this person. It was really damp and raining hard, and Elvis said something like, "I'm really sick of all this rain." And according to this guy, Elvis opens the sunroof, steps outside, and puts his hands together and moves them apart like Moses parting the Red Seas. And he said that when he did that, Elvis cleared a path in the rain that perfectly aligned with the road they were driving on, and the sun shined on the road perfectly from the spot they were at all the way to wherever it was they were driving. So these are some of the miracles Elvis was said to have been able to do. He could also heal people by touching them. He could also, supposedly, one of the examples was he cured someone's cancer by praying for them. So whether or not he actually did these things, Elvis believed he could do these things. I'm confident of that. Elvis genuinely believed he could perform miracles. Elvis the scholar. Elvis always had a deep longing to understand God, and he firmly believed in God and Jesus. However, it wasn't until he met his hairdresser, Larry Geller, and was rejected by many Christians for his provocative movements that he began to look deep into alternative spiritual teachings outside of the Bible. Although he always believed the Bible, and some who knew him will even say it was his favorite book, he took interest in theosophy, Kabbalah, Mayan mythology, and writers like Helena Blavatsky. And when it came to Blavatsky, he was really attached to her because she looked just like his mother, and that was enough for him to think that she was a good woman. It was said that Elvis would travel with up to 200 books at a time and devour every bit of knowledge that he could by absorbing all the information and then contemplating on what he read for a certain time period. Elvis was incredibly studious and seemed to be driven by seeking answers to why he was the one so gifted, while at the same time losing so much in the form of his mother and his twin brother, which I'll get into more of his twin brother in later slides, but losing his twin brother at birth, along with losing his mother later in life, deeply traumatized Elvis, and it almost seems like he didn't even know how to handle it. One of the reasons why I think he read all these books. And another thing is he was all into this occult and esoteric readings. You could really call Elvis the first or one of the first conspiracy theorists or truth seekers before there were conspiracy theorists or truth seekers, or about when they were starting to come into being. Elvis was one of the first one of these types of people. And this on the right is the book he was reading at his death, which I think is a very fitting book because Elvis wanted to be like Jesus. He really looked up to Jesus. I'd say he was probably his biggest role model and inspiration in life, besides probably his own mother and father. And I think he really saw himself in Jesus, and he saw Jesus in himself. So you can almost say to Elvis, his face was almost like the face of Jesus, in the sense that he tried his best to live up to Jesus' example. So his death ritual, in the end, Elvis knew he would die in ritualistic fashion, likely due to his knowledge of Kabbalah. He embraced his death, and he seemed to accelerate it by living a certain lifestyle and keeping certain people around him, like the Colonel, and enabling his Memphis Mafia, because they were pretty bad at spending his money. However, I think in his mind, he thought he was an awakened Christ-like figure who did not shy away from dying for those he loved most, his fans. And this is even hinted at in the 2022 movie with Adam Butler. If you haven't seen the movie, I'm going to give you some spoilers here. He dies in the end. I know, spoiler. But when he dies, they have the Tom Hanks character, who he plays, Tom Parker. He says, it wasn't the drugs and it wasn't me who killed Elvis. It was because Elvis loved his fans so much that he just kept pushing for them. Basically, this is what they say in the movie. And I have to think that that's some type of message saying that that's really why he died. And I have to think that is probably why he died. They put messages in movies if you do pay attention. In Elvis's mind, he seemed to think he was acting as a spiritual healer of the people, using music as his medicine to reach as many as possible. Miguel Connor thinks that Elvis thought the trauma that he had acquired throughout his life, the trauma of being poor, the trauma of his mother, who was not a very good mother, who I'll get into that towards the end, the trauma of his twin dying, and generally just the mystical experiences of his life. He thought that if he healed those traumas, that he would not be able to heal others, and that his magic touch would disappear. And I put magic touch there in air quotes. I'm not sure if Miguel Connor uses that term. I'm going to use it because if you take the stories of his miracles literally, then he would pretty much have a magic touch. And while I call Elvis America's son hero, Miguel Connor will call him America's shaman, which I also think is a fitting term for him. I think the fact that Elvis embraced his death is on full display in his final concert, where he's wearing an Aztec or Mayan sun symbol, which likely reflects the fact he thought of himself as a sun hero, awakened Christ, that he would be sacrificed, and that he would be sacrificed in ritualistic fashion, similar to Jesus. So I'm not actually sure if it is supposed to be an Aztec or Mayan sun. I'll show you the images of his jumpsuit in later slides, but I think it's Mayan. I'm not entirely sure though, and fans don't seem to be in agreement either. And another reason that I would say that Elvis embraced his death was so that he could reunite with his mother and his twin, because it wasn't only his love for his fans that guided him, it was also his love for his family and the ones he knew and cared about in his own life. It was all the people that he loved. American history and Elvis's life. Elvis Presley and the history of the United States seems to be intertwined in reflections of one another. As I mentioned, there is a great rise in both the individual and the whole nation, and both needed to be put in the work to achieve this. In Elvis's case, he worked relentlessly, touring the nation, and would sometimes have a concert every night for weeks on end. Sometimes even doing two nights a show, 2 shows a night in Vegas, while also recording 784 songs and 31 movies. Similarly, no one in this nation was handed anything for free. Yes, we did have assistance during the Revolutionary War and some good deals like the Louisiana Purchase, but that was more so done out of necessity and the fact England was enemy with those nations and who those nations served. Because as I said, England was Protestant, those nations were Catholic. They certainly wouldn't want the new colonies to end up Protestant and rebellious like England was. Then, through great hardships and conflicts of American warriors and pioneers, we eventually secured this nation's future by creating a nation with 2 oceans, eventually connected by railroad and later by flight. Because of the hard work put in, both the US and Elvis achieved the highest highs any entertainer or any nation has ever reached. However, Elvis fell hard, which could happen to this nation if we continue a path of self-destruction like Elvis did. And like I said, guys, Elvis's life is a microcosm that is a reflection of the macrocosm. Okay. Elvis's flaws and America's flaws. Even though Elvis was a great, loving, spiritual person, he was as flawed as anyone else. He was materialistic, an adulterer, and addicted to drugs. These things contributed to his death, on top of his embrace of death that he already had. In fact, I would say that because of his embrace of death, he was so into those things. Above all, Elvis was exploited by people like Colonel Tom Parker, who used his doctor, George Nicopolis, to pump Elvis full of drugs so he could perform as much work as he did. Elvis believed naively that if drugs were prescribed by a doctor, they were okay. And this is a reflection, I think, of the average American who typically works frequently many hours a day ultimately for people who don't care about them so that they can take a percentage of the wealth they earn. Many Americans also naively believe these people have our best interests and continue to support them willingly, just as Elvis did. And another thing about Elvis is that, another reason he was so flawed was because his mom left him in the form of death. Priscilla left him by just leaving him, and she took his daughter. And he just felt alone, and not only that, he never really learned how to properly love a woman, largely because of his own mother's lack of parenting skills, I would say, was probably the biggest cause for that. Furthermore, a lot of people will point to the fact that Tom Parker was the one who pushed Elvis over the edge, but I would say that a lot of these people, especially if they are American, are no different from Elvis in the sense that, like Elvis, they have their own Colonel Tom Parkers in their lives who take advantage of them that they don't say no to. And, it's always easy to look at someone else's life and point to where they're doing wrong. But the thing about Elvis's life is that we can look to his life and reflect on our own. Because like I say, his life in the microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm. And these are just things that pretty much every American deals with. They deal with people who overwork them, constantly trying to get them pumped full of drugs so they could keep working, and in the end don't really care about them. If they plop over, it actually works out for them in the end, because then they don't have to pay them Social Security and they could just keep all that money. So accelerationism and Frankism. So accelerationism is just basically the idea that we should perpetuate materialism and materialistic gains and production to collapse society. So it has the intention of just accelerating it, cranking it all up to 11 so that it implodes on itself. Frankism is the idea that we should perpetuate immorality to bring about the second coming of Jesus Christ, so that Jesus can come along and solve the issues for us. And that's what acceleration wants to do too, so that when the system does collapse, other people who supposedly know what they're doing can come in and rebuild the system in their image. So Elvis's self-destructive way of living is promoted in these ideologies, which the American people's ultimate puppet masters cling to. They cling to ideologies such as this. These ideologies are similar, Frankism being an Enlightenment era ideology and accelerationism being a more modern materialistic version. What they have in common is they both view society and human civilizations as imperfect messes, that need to be corrected. So they plan on perpetuating the mess to astronomical levels until society collapses and order can be restored. They go hand in hand with the saying, order out of chaos, which is a saying that the ruling class lives by, and they pretty much try to create as much chaos as possible so that they can eventually create order, although it is their order. Certainly not a natural order based in alignment with God. Elvis's life reflects that of accelerationism in that he seemingly raced for an early grave, which is exactly what this nation is doing, by encouraging in and supporting immoral people and actions. Until we learn to say no, we just can't stop it. Okay, so essentially you could say Elvis was essentially speed running life before video games were even a thing. And we're almost speed running this nation to the ground too, similar fashion. And for these images on the left, that is Jacob Frank, who is the person attributed with Frankism. It's named after him. And then on the right, all I did was I took the first two paragraphs of accelerationism described on Wikipedia and uploaded it into an AI image generator, and it generated that. And I think that that's a very fitting image of what accelerationism is. Just people marching towards a literal black hole abyss that offers them nothing, but takes from them everything. So bravo AI on that one. Elvis's lack of repentance and self-reflection. Elvis never really repented for his sinful lifestyle and drugs and adultery, which many Christians argue this makes him a bad person, not worthy of being praised on the level that he is. And I generally have to agree with them because, you know, he was said that sometimes to have like 80 girlfriends at a time. I mean, that is just a bit ridiculous, especially if you are trying to be this Christ-like figure like he was. But then again, it's just his way of trying to make up for his trauma. And since he had access to it, since he had access to all these women and all these materialistic things, it's just hard to control himself. In fact, I could only find 2 instances where he came even close to repenting. One time when he was with one of his girlfriends, she asked him what his biggest flaw was. And he said, or she quoted Elvis as saying, "I'll probably only admit this once, but I'm self-destructive." This, to my knowledge, is one of 2 times Elvis did any sort of self-reflection into his own flaws. The collective of America seems to mirror this fault, however, as many people are incapable of truly bettering themselves by doing necessary shadow work that requires us to examine our lives, the choices we've made, and how they impact ourselves and others. And that's what the image on the right represents. Represents coming into unison with our shadow and embracing it. And on the left, I have a picture of Stalin, because this was one of the other times that Elvis came close to repenting. And I think it did actually have an impact on his life. So it goes like he was out in the desert, driving or somewhere, and he had a vision of Stalin. And in this moment, he realized that he was a bad person, because I think he was asking for signs in this moment of, what am I doing wrong? I need guidance to God. And upon doing so, he received a vision of Stalin. And in his mind, it was very clear, the interpretation was basically that since Stalin was basically the symbol of evil during his time period, he thought of himself as an evil person who needed to change himself to be more of a good person so that he can counterbalance wickedness such as Stalin. So his vision of Stalin was another time when he came close to repenting, and he did change a little bit, I think. Aside from that, Elvis doesn't really make any attempt to heal himself or to better himself in regards to his adultery, his drugs, and his materialism. Although I will say he was very generous with his wealth, especially to people of his own community in Memphis. Elvis's sacrifice. His life mirrors that of Christ in the sense he reached millions of people, wanted them to live better lives, and died for those he loved most, his fans, and even his family members. Though unlike Jesus, Elvis was not a perfect person in action, nor did he try to better himself, as I stated. For example, Elvis would routinely threaten his Memphis Mafia members with guns and even physically assault them. So there's stories of him punching his bodyguards in the face and they don't do anything to retaliate because they're afraid they might hurt him. There's stories of him pointing guns at his bodyguards and other Memphis Mafia members. And I didn't clarify what the Memphis Mafia was. The Memphis Mafia was just basically the group that hung around him wherever he went. They were basically like his dependents. And one time, Elvis even, one of them says that allegedly he asked them to murder someone on his behalf, giving them like an AK. And the bodyguard luckily refused. And, since he refused, I think that shows the type of followers that Elvis had, which was ultimately good followers who, they aren't going to go out and kill on their master's command. So I'll give his followers some props there. In the end, however, out of love for his fans and a longing to be reunited with his mother and his twin, Elvis embraced his death ritual just like Jesus accepted his. They both ascended into mythological status and will likely both be remembered for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years. And I'm going to say, I think as long as the United States is remembered, Elvis will probably be remembered too. Another thing too is Elvis really wanted to be like Jesus as much as he could. He really took to heart of living by the example of Jesus, and he took the concept of Christ consciousness, which is that we could all be Christ if we choose to live true lives, true to ourselves and true to God's, then we can attain this Christ consciousness. But Elvis, I think, wanted to take it a step further because he already thought he was chosen, that he really wanted to be like Jesus and go all out and even die for those he loved, just like Jesus. The role of shadow work. Shadow work is the act of facing our own reflections generated by our actions and life experiences. These reflections are what lurk in our subconscious and the subconsciousness of nature itself. Many, like Elvis, do not properly face these reflections and they become unknown shadows to the self. But nature understands our shadows. And what that means, guys, is nature is always watching us at all times. And if we don't know ourselves, that doesn't mean that nature doesn't know ourselves, because nature knows itself and it knows how we interact within the natural world. So ultimately, nature knows if we're good people, if we're honest people, and if we don't ever confront our shadows, they're just going to linger there. But just because we're not confronting our shadows or facing them doesn't mean that nothing is, because nature is. Elvis would likely still be alive today if he had done proper shadow work and made an effort to stop his self-destructive tendencies. He never did, and as stated, he accelerated his faults to reach what in his mind would be the highest spiritual height he could attain. And that would basically be living and dying like Jesus. The average person, however, is not on Elvis's level of esoteric knowledge and understanding, because it takes some work to get there, and Elvis put in the work to get there. And failure to elevate this level, even just a little bit, will see negative consequences generated in nature. Let's get some water. So basically what that means is, if we're not going to better ourselves, nature will just come in and do its thing. Whatever that means, whatever that is, it's going to do it. And one way that I think we, especially as Americans, can better ourselves is to just simply look to Elvis's life and ask ourselves, are we living a similarly self-destructive lifestyle like Elvis? Christs and antichrists. Anyone, regardless of race, intelligence level, wealth, or social status, can attain Christ or antichrist consciousness. To know if you are living in alignment with Christ consciousness, just ask yourself this one question. Are you living a life in alignment set by the example of Jesus Christ or not? If you are living in alignment with the example of the life of Jesus Christ, then you are embodying Christ consciousness. Now, it's one thing to be ignorant or nescient of this. However, antichrists take this a step further, as they know of this, or at least have an idea of this sort of thing, but they actively reject it to further their own will and worldviews, often at the expense of others. Jesus said it best when he said that he says right here, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. What that basically means is that he is a person who's willing to die for those who follow him. This is what a Christ-like figure does. But anti-Christ-like figures do the opposite. They basically expect their followers to die for them. They basically want to live at their followers' expense without actually bettering their lives. Now, they're going to give them illusions that they're bettering their lives, but they're really not. Okay? And right here, this verse 2 is very important. Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. None come to the Father except through me. Basically, all that means is that I am the way that Jesus lived, the truth, and the life. That means that his way is the truth to living in alignment with God's principles. That's all that verse means. It doesn't mean that you need to believe in Jesus and that you're suddenly saved. It means that we actually need to do the work by living like Jesus. Okay, because that's the only way that we can possibly come to the Father, as it says there. No other way. In this regard, Elvis would be a person who died for his followers because in his mind, he thought he was doing the best thing for him to do out of love and embraced it just like Christ. So basically, he thought that dying the way he did was just inevitable and that embracing it would be the most loving thing he could do for his fans. Now, why is that? I don't know exactly. I don't have the answer for that, but I think that's what he thought. And then this verse on the right here is very important. It says, truly I tell you, whoever believes in me also do the works that I am doing. He will do even greater things than these because I am going to the Father. That basically means Jesus right there is telling you that we can be greater than he is, or he was. Okay? So, any of us today, whether it's Elvis Presley or whether it's even the homeless person who lives down the street, can tap into Christ consciousness and become greater than Jesus. We all have this potential. Okay? Just like we all have the potential to not tap into these energies, or just like we have the potential to be an antichrist who wants to live at other people's expense and perpetuate violence in the world. So here's what I mean exactly by Christ-like figures and antichrist-like figures. Here on the left, we have the antichrist-like figures, symbolized by Nimrod here and Donald Trump. And on the right, we have the Christ figures of, Jesus. This is an older depiction of Jesus. And Elvis. And I have here the inverted pentagram to represent the Antichrist figures. And I have the right side standing up pentagram to represent the Christ-like figures. So if you don't know, Nimrod is basically the original Antichrist, although if you go by early Christians and New Testament writings and papyrus, they're going to tell you it's Nero. Now that's not wrong. However, if you read the Bible, specifically the Old Testament, the first person to ever come along who wants to do anything even remotely like I described, where they're having all these people go out and fight and kill and die on their behalf, is going to be Nimrod. Nimrod is basically the first person to say, I am God, and you will all do my bidding, because I know better. Not just better than you, but I know better than God. I know better than nature. And today, here in 2025, Donald Trump most certainly emulates this antichrist energy, because Donald Trump is a person who basically just wants to live at everyone else's expense. It's what he's done his whole life. His whole life he's had people go work construction jobs for him just to take them to court to not pay them. And now he's coming into office and he wants to start all these wars in South America and other places. He constantly wants to harass China. He needs us to do that, and he's going to need some of us to die in order to do that, guys. That's not Christ-like archetypal energy or ways of doing things. That's more like Nimrod. That's more like Antichrist ways of doing things. Elvis, on the other hand, when he asked someone to go kill for him, they said no. Imagine doing that to Donald Trump. Imagine if Donald Trump asked soldiers to go into some land to go and fight and kill on his behalf, and they said no. Well, there'd probably be some sort of repercussions for them, and he'd make an example of them showing, this is what happens when you don't follow my will and my commands. So this is really the difference between Antichrist figures and Christ-like figures. Antichrist figures want you to die for them. Christ-like figures are willing to die for you so that you can better yourself. And just ask yourself, who embodies which more? Does Donald Trump really want to help you better your life? Is Donald Trump willing to die for you? If he is, he sure's got me fooled. Elvis, on the other hand, he did go out and die for his fans. He embraced it wholeheartedly. And I'll tell you what, he also thought he'd be back. He was a big believer in reincarnation, as well as spiritual ascension. So his final concert, Elvis, with his knowledge of occult principles, encoded his death into his final performance. The most apparent reason, for me at least, the most noticeable thing was his suit. He's wearing the Aztec or Mayan sun calendar, and on the right, this is an actual depiction. I'm pretty sure this is Aztec here on the right. But you can see the faces are very similar. They have the same headdress, similar headdress and nose. Got their mouth open. This is his tongue sticking out. I'm not sure if right here, maybe you can see that. I'm not sure if that's his tongue sticking out or beard, but I'm going to assume that's probably his tongue sticking out because that's what it is here. But where you'll notice the difference is here, if you count the number of rays here on the outside, the outer layers and the inner layers here, they hold 16 rays, and then this middle layer here holds 8 rays, which some people think, and I'm fairly confident he did this on purpose, to signify the day he would die, August 16th, which of course is the 8th month and the 16th day, reflecting the 8 inner rays and the 16 outer rays. I think this was Elvis's way of showing those in the know that he was ready to move on and become something greater than those who took advantage of him. And I'm going to say those people who are in the know, these are the people who use occult practices and principles basically to run the world. Okay, and if you want to know more about that, just go watch my last video, The Occult Season of Sacrifice. Go to the Who section, and I'll give you an idea of who's doing this. Okay, because I think that this was probably for them. This was like his message to them. That's what I think personally. I can't confirm this, but from what I can tell with how fearless he seemed to be of death, and the fact that he wanted to be as much like Jesus as possible, this was his way of sticking it to the people who would basically be the equivalent of the people in Jesus' time that Jesus was at spiritual war against. And I'm not talking about Tom Parker specifically. I'm talking probably more of his handlers, because I don't think Tom Parker knew very much about this sort of stuff, from what I can tell. These civilizations, the Aztecs and Mayans, would sacrifice individuals to the sun god for various reasons. And they always wanted worthy individuals, okay? And what was worthy, as far as I can tell, were people who were young and handsome and attractive and fit. These were who the gods wanted to be sacrificed. You know, preferably they were very fertile as well. Not that it would matter very much when they cut your head off and they got your body rolling down the pyramid, but this is what they wanted. And Elvis, I think, wanted to show that he was worthy, and like the son who rose before him, chose to die for those he loved while embracing being sacrificed on the altar. And right here, I say the son. This, of course, is a Jesus who rose before him. One thing about Jesus is an allegory for the sun, the literal sun in the sky. This is why it says things like he is risen and he is the sun. You can really interchange the O and the U here. This is what Elvis wanted to be like. He wanted to be like the sun in the sky that everyone knew and remembered for great things. And he wanted to be like the Son, Jesus Christ, who died for those he loved to help better their lives. Okay, and this is what I think Elvis was all about. So Kabbalah, Elvis's death was synced up with his polio vaccine, as from his birthday to the day he got it was 42 weeks exactly, from January 8th to October 28th in 1956. So that is a leap year. If you were to do January 8th to January 28th in a non-leap year, it would be exactly 41 weeks and 6 days later. And of course, it's important that Elvis got this 42 weeks precisely from January 8th to October 28th, because Elvis was 42 years old when he died. There are also many words associated with vaccine that equate to 42 in black culture words. Elvis, of course, known for his relationship with blacks, which was taboo at the time for whites and blacks to get along the way they did. Not to say that it didn't happen, but it was just more uncommon. And there are likely other examples regarding Kabbalah that Elvis probably knew about. I'm just going to give you this one example here of something that he probably looked into. So basically, it's just analyzing the numeric value of words like his name and associating it with date numerologies, something I'm fairly confident Elvis would have been well read on up to this point. Because as I said, he was a huge scholar, constantly reading all kinds of occult and esoteric books. So this is probably what Elvis would have been looking at, something like this. I don't know if this polio vaccine was exactly what he looked at, but this is just an example of how Kabbalah rituals are used in conjunction with deaths. So, as I said, he was 42 years old when he died, and it was 42 weeks between his birthday and the day he got it precisely. So here are some of the words that equal 42 in gematria, which is the Kabbalistic practice of coding numbers into words. Gematria is basically a geometry of frequencies using numeric patterns of numbers or words, numeric patterns of words, to build boxes in people's minds. That's, as far as I can tell, that seems to be gematria's biggest use. Okay, and I know that sounds a bit complicated, but it's just all based on frequencies that the words form, and it forms a sort of geometry or geometric pattern that literally shape our views, because all language is based in this. So as you can see, some of the words here that equal 42: vaccine, polio shot, TV. He of course did get his polio shot on TV. He got it in the left arm. He was 21 years old when he got it. And just some 42 things for the blacks. You know, Jackie 42 and blacks 42. As I said, Elvis dying at 42 and that number being significant to black history. Just thought I'd show a couple examples there. But gematria is all about using words to form boxes through numeric patterns in the form of geometry based on frequencies we communicate. So there are 4 ways to break down gematria here. Just go over them real quickly. The most basic one is A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, all the way up to Z, which is 26. Then you can take that and reduce it. So now A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, all the way up to J, which is 1. So basically you just do occult reduction. Since J is the 10th letter, you would just take 1 and 0 and add them together, which equals 1. K is 11, so it'd just be 1 plus 1, which equals 2. and you repeat that until you get to Z. Then there's the reverse cipher, which is now A is 26, or I'm sorry, Z is 1, Y is 2, X is 3, all the way up to A, which is 26. And then the reverse reduction, which is the same thing, except now you get up to Q, which is the 10th letter from Z, or the 16th letter of the alphabet. And you would just take 1 and 0 and add them, and now Q is 1. So there's other ways to do this, but these are the most prominent ways I've seen. And this is just basically how you do gematria and how it relates to English. And another one I'm going to show you is 59. 59 is associated with Elvis's name and black people. Just notice, Elvis Presley equals 59 in the reduction cipher. And then the amount of words that are associated with black culture that equal 59 as well. So this is how gematria works. It's just basically another way of saying Elvis Presley is like black people. But it's through numbers. So hopefully I explained gematria all right there, and I showed not exactly what Elvis was looking at, but probably something similar to what he was looking at. That's probably one of the ways he got down his exact death date. Anyway, his connection to higher things. Throughout his entire life, Elvis believed he was guided by higher forces beyond human. His twin brother, Jesse, dying at birth had a profound impact in his psyche, and he'd often see his twin in dreams and thought of him as a sort of guide or demon in his life. And I don't mean demon in the biblical sense. I mean this more of in the Greek sense, in that there were entities who would come that weren't human, maybe from some other dimension or astral plane, and they would help us in life. They'd be like our friend. And I don't remember which philosopher. There was one of those famous Greek philosophers who supposedly had one. I don't remember which one it was, though. Another thing, too, is that this is something called twinless survivor guilt. And basically, it's just when your twin dies at birth, you carry this trauma throughout your life of why me? Why not him? Why wasn't I the one to die? Or thoughts to this effect. And there's definitely tacks onto hardships to deal with. On top of this, Elvis thought that Jesse could communicate with him, and basically, from what it sounds like, it's almost like Jesse was a sort of spider sense for Elvis, guiding him throughout life. He also had several encounters with UFOs in his life, encouraging his friends he was with to not be afraid, because he thought UFOs were ultimately helping humanity. And one of the things Elvis was quoted as saying during this instance was, if they come down to make contact with us, we shouldn't fear them because they're not going to hurt us. So we should match their energies or their actions or something to that effect. So you combine this with his mystical abilities and astral projection capabilities. Elvis was either a human chosen by nature to carry a great burden while also reaching many, energizing them in himself, or an alien. Miguel Connor, he says you can make the distinction and choose which one you think. I'm going to let the people who view this also make their own conclusions, because I can't say for certain. But I'm probably leaning more towards he was a person who had, you could say, spiritual energies flowing through him, almost like electricity flowing through wires throughout a house or something like that. That's kind of what he seems like to me. And another thing I want to mention is Elvis thought that the aliens that existed, or the UFOs, he thought that their purpose was to keep humanity safe and even destroy nukes and keep us from nuking ourselves. Now that right there is incredible because he's actually correct, and I don't really know how he knew that, unless maybe he really was astral traveling and communicating with these spirits and the dead. Because, I'm just going to say, go into your search bar, type in the 2010 National Disclosure Conference, and you will hear firsthand experiences of exactly that. Aliens or UFOs destroying nukes and trying to keep our weapons in check. So, that right there, the fact that he thought that or knew that, I think adds some credibility to what he's saying. And again, guys, the 2010 National Disclosure Conference is pretty much spot on with what Elvis was saying. Elvis's death mirroring America's decline. The USA and Elvis both had unprecedented rises in history and, for better or worse, changed civilization forever. However, Elvis had a great fall because of his refusal to accept his own faults, much like how the USA does the same. Our nation is guided by materialism, war, and antichrist figures who pump the people full of drugs so they could keep working, just like Elvis. The Colonel Tom Parker for the American people is the federal government who, through social contract, spends our money and wealth on the people's behalf because they have convinced the people they are needed to do so, just like Tom Parker convinced Elvis that Elvis needed him. The American people, like Elvis, are working for people who don't care about them beyond a one-sided symbiotic relationship that is more parasitic than symbiotic in nature. So, basically, guys, I know some of you will probably disagree with this. We really don't need the government. We need them about as much as Elvis needed Tom Parker. Okay, do they do some things for us here and there? Yes. But ultimately, like the Antichrist, they just guide us towards a way that basically forces us to live at their expense and their backers' expense. All the meanwhile, we end up going the way of this rat here on the right, or going the way of Elvis, dying prematurely, living unhealthy lives, and ultimately serving people who don't even love us. They don't even love us, guys. Know that. If you think some people like Donald Trump love you, or the people in government love you, I got news for you. They don't. They don't. They love you about as much as old Colonel Tom Parker loved Elvis. And that was to the extent of how much money and how much wealth can we squeeze out of him. A call for healing. Ultimately, as long as the American people choose to be someone else's workhorse, we will go the way of Elvis, dying a humiliating and unfortunate way that was ultimately deserved because, like Elvis, we brought it on ourselves. And I do say Elvis's death was humiliating because everyone that you talk to or everyone you ask is going to say the same thing. He died on the toilet. He died on the toilet. He didn't even die on the toilet. They found him passed out on the floor. But that's not how people remember him. People basically remember Elvis dying taking a crap. And I'll say that's probably the way our nation's going to go too if we don't shape up. We'll be remembered very similarly. It doesn't have to be this way, as I think Elvis's role was to highlight what could be a likely outcome if we choose self destruction over looking within and making changes to be more in alignment with Christ's consciousness and nature. If we refuse this task of becoming more spiritual and Christ like, the United States will fizzle out and die. This will be the consequence of nature that has been demonstrated through the ultimate American, Elvis Presley. So again, guys, Elvis's life is a reflection of the macro, and we can stop this trajectory, but it requires us to self-reflect on ourselves. And I think also reflecting on Elvis's life and how we are living and asking ourselves, are we living like Elvis, can help us avoid this path that I think our nation is really set on, the path of accelerationism. Like I said, it doesn't have to be this way, but individuals need to make a change. Okay, and I'm talking like millions of individuals. So, some quick points here that I'm going to go over that I didn't get to because this presentation's long enough. Elvis's relationship with his mother. Elvis was just basically a mama's boy, and his mother was very controlling. The term that I heard used was she was basically involved in lethal enmeshment, which is basically she had shortcomings and insecurities in her own lives, and she basically used these shortcomings and insecurities to encircle Elvis, her son. And she had an experience in her early life where she tried to go out and chase one of her dreams and ultimately failed. And this gave her a bad experience of what it's like to go chase dreams. On top of this, Jesse dying at birth also prompted her to smother Elvis more. And the fact that after she had Elvis, she was told she could not have any more children. So a lot of the things in her life prompted her to encircle Elvis, which just created a bad relationship overall. And again, the term that I heard was lethal enmeshment. Another term I've heard used was dragon mother. Elvis's mother was one of these people, okay, who projected her own shortcomings onto Elvis and trapped him with them. Another point, Roy Hamilton and Bill Haley in the comments. Elvis was not original in his music. And these are really the people that he was largely inspired from, on top of his church-going music. People will swear up and down that Elvis copied everything from this man, Roy Hamilton. Even though they collaborated together and worked together and had this great respect for each other. There does seem to be some haters, though, in that regard. And then Bill Haley in the comments also deserve recognition. They were one of the first rock bands. And you're probably familiar with at least one of their songs, 12 O'Clock Rock. But these are who Elvis was inspired by. So I'm not going to say Elvis was entirely original in his music. And if you do want to look into the people who he was inspired by, these would be who. Priscilla and Elvis, 10-year age difference. Yeah, so you can take this as you will, but basically, as far as I can tell, Elvis and Priscilla did not have any relationships until she was 18. And when she was 18, it was Priscilla who was the one who was coming on to Elvis because, from what I can tell, Elvis just kind of kept her like locked away in the house, away from everyone, so to speak. And she got well, she had sexual desires and they weren't being met. So eventually, when she was 18, she just came on to Elvis. And these are the stories we have of their relationship in those days. Now, you can take it as you will. Some people don't believe it. That's fine. But again, that Elvis, as far as I can tell, did not have any sexual relations with Priscilla when she was 14 through 17. On top of this, teenagers weren't even really a thing back then. I don't even think the term existed. And Elvis, the reason he chose Priscilla was because no other woman he'd ever come into contact with reminded him more of his mom than Priscilla. She just had the aura. Next point, miracles weren't foolproof. I talked about his miracles and how he could heal people and do all these things. Some people didn't quite believe in them. Elvis believed in them, though. I'll give you one example. There was one ski trip that happened. One of the person had an accident and they thought he broke his leg. So when Elvis found out, of course, he had to go over there and try and help out by healing him with his touch. And he did touch him. But when they went back to the cabin, they found out his leg wasn't broken and it was just bruised. So the person who got touched, I don't remember their name, they thought, oh boy, I was lucky. Because if it was broken, I could have been screwed. Basically thinking that Elvis didn't have anything to do with healing. That it was just bruised all along. Meanwhile, though, in Elvis's mind, he was told that it was broken. And then when they went back to the cabin, it was a bruise. In Elvis's mind, he healed a broken leg by touching it. So these are some of the miracles that happened. But that one that I told you about, the rain, that dude he said it with such conviction, I don't think he was lying. Desegregation through music. So I will say that, or I think Elvis did help pave the way for desegregation. Excuse me. By implementing country music and blues music together in a sort of harmony that just hadn't been done before. And he showed, I think, that since black music and white music can come together and sound beautiful, black people and white people should be able to come together and live in harmony in the real world beyond music. And I think that his music helped pave the way for that. His fascination with death. Elvis really had a strong fascination with death. He thought he could communicate with the dead, and I'm not even just talking about Jesse. I thought he could just talk. I'm pretty sure he thought he could communicate with dead spirits in general. And not only this, he thought he remembered one of his past lives as an Egyptian pharaoh. I don't know which Egyptian pharaoh. That would be interesting, but this is some of the things he allegedly believed. And not only this, he was also said to go hang out at cemeteries and be there late at night, staring at dead bodies, trying to be closer to death. So I don't know exactly what it was with him and death. Maybe it's because he knew he would die and he wanted to try to experience it as much as he can while alive. But he was definitely fascinated with death. And then the last point are his alien-like images. I was going to post them here, but I just didn't. I'll post the links in the description of what I'm talking about. But there are some images of Elvis, and I think it might be due to bad quality in his later years, bad camera quality, where he just looks like something out of They Live. He looks just like it, which I felt like I had to put that in here at some point. Just because if that is the case, it would fit into alignment with his blue light phenomenon and his UFO encounters and his miracle birth. So if you think Elvis is an alien, there's some more evidence for you there. Although I personally don't think Elvis was an alien. Elvis's influence over women, I think, and I made this its own slide because I think it's probably the most important point that I can go over. The most important quick point. If the women did not love Elvis like they did, I'm fairly confident Elvis never would have made it, even with Tom Parker's help. Okay? As far as I can tell, I don't really think men seemed to like Elvis that much when he came out. Men that were of his age or older, it was the women who loved Elvis. And over time, because he never went away, men recognized that women loved Elvis, and they began to love Elvis and began to emulate Elvis so that they could attract women. So basically, guys, what Elvis showed to me is something I already knew. Men follow women. Women are the real leaders of this world, and I even talk about this in my Occult Season of Sacrifice video a little bit too. Because men are willing to change themselves to fit women's standard. And when someone like Elvis comes along, who the women are just falling head over heels for, you best believe that there's going to be some men out there who are willing to change themselves, at least just a little bit, to conform to the woman's standard of what she wants in a man. Which, Elvis showed. Elvis showed things like it's okay to be more sensitive. It's okay to like science fiction and things like that in comic books. It's okay to seek more spiritual knowledge. These are the things Elvis was about. It wasn't necessarily just his dance moves, although that is what they noticed at first, definitely. Just ultimately, guys, women are the leaders and men will change themselves to conform to women's standards. And again, I think if women didn't latch on to Elvis like they did at first, Elvis would not have made it. And then here's a quote by Carl Jung: all the most powerful ideas in history go back to archetypes. And I think that for Elvis, as I said, he's a reflection. He is in a microcosm that's a reflection of the macrocosm of this nation. Ultimately, Elvis wanted to heal this nation, but could not heal himself. And so I'd say he fits the archetype, not just of the ruler or the jester or the hero, but also as a sort of wounded healer. And the power we all have. Elvis's most powerful song that I've heard is "Who Am I?" And this is the most important question any person seeking to be more spiritual should ask themselves, because it will ultimately force them to confront the fact they are from source. This source, no matter which way you look at it, is God. This is the question that, if asked genuinely, with proper understanding, not understanding, understanding, will force us to remember who we are, and that is that we are members of God's kingdom, and we already have the key. The key is simply remembering. Remembering is the key to being a member of God's kingdom. That's really all it comes down to. Just remember where you come from. Remember you come from source, and try to live by the example of Christ. Doing this, we can overcome materialism and the fear of our own shadows, because we will know God's love and forgiveness. And ultimately, guys, Elvis's life offers a reflection of what is wrong with our entire nation, while at the same time reflecting what we want to strive for deep down. It's just that we want to be more spiritual, we want to be better people, but we're held back by things like materialism, and we're held back by, parasite people, just like Elvis was. And that's why I think Elvis is really the ultimate American. Because if we can look to his life and ask ourselves questions like, wait a minute, is our nation going down a similar path? Maybe we can stop it. But like I said, that would require a tremendous effort. Well, anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I'll probably have more videos again eventually. And I'll see you guys next time.